I've spent all my life at the crossroads of knowledge and society because I started as a teacher, had 12-year-olds, which is usually the best audience you can have because they're interested and you have to make things simple. And then I was a journalist until 20 years ago. I started working in knowledge companies. I spent a couple of years in a pharmaceutical chemical company, 7 years with an electrotechnical company, in the last 4 years with Shell. So having difficult and sometimes contentious material that you need to communicate not only to journalists but to the outside world is something that is part of the reason I go to work, because I really like doing that. It's nice to be back in Brussels. I used to come here a lot when I was Reuters chief correspondent in Bonn back in the late 80s, when Bonn was actually the West German capital, remember? We used to come here to cover something called the Common Market. And I remember sitting up late at night while people were discussing CAP, which I believe has something to do with agricultural subsidies. And it was a time when I was actually able to go to all the briefings from the different member nations, except for Greece. You know, it was a small and cozy place. And that was even before my own country, Sweden, joined. And I kind of like coming back here because it brings back memories. So my connection with Europe, as its history has moved through fits and starts, I said, goes back to the late 1970s. I was with the UPI then, and frequently went on reporting assignments to East Germany. I saw a Soviet tank division being pulled out of Lutherstadt-Wittenberg in 1980 as part of détente. I was in Poland in the summer of Solidarity 1980 and went back there under martial law in 1982. On February 23rd, 1981, I was dispatched to Madrid to cover a coup attempt, and then remained there for 2 years as the chief correspondent of UPI. So that was one of the few places I've been in Europe where the story actually was positive for 2 years and a stretch. I heard Reagan make his famous speech about tearing down that wall in 1988 in Berlin. And then, of course, came that giant leap, which began in Europe in 1989. Since I moved to PR around then, I've seen both Europe and the world through a business in society lens since then, and of course as my own personal lens as a Swedish citizen. So what can you learn in a personal journey like this, and how can that be relevant to the task and mission of Atomium culture? First of all, you can make change happen if you use knowledge and enthusiasm in the right sort of combination and make clear to people where the journey is going. But you need to be able to connect to your fellow citizens, and you especially have to be able to connect with the young. And if you think of Twitter and Facebook and social networks on the web, where conversation is more important than content, then there's a great, huge level of challenge for science to connect with society, because most young people don't actually read newspapers anymore. They get their information differently. They can be extremely educated. So if you want to do something that reaches beyond the elite, you have to find a way to catch the fish the other end and lead it back into the mainstream again. And of course, the role of my former profession is key here. But media can only play that role if those who have the knowledge agree to what, and I'll have to tell you a little story about a seeds researcher in that Swiss company I worked for, Sandoz. He used to call me the vulgarizer when I turned up and asked him to explain things to me. And I asked him once to explain how it could be that a genetically modified sugar beet seed didn't change the sugar beet or the sugar or the jam in significant enough ways for this not to be labeled on the tin. That was 1993. Failure to communicate means that sugar beet seed is still not registered in Europe, because that's how science fails to connect to the concerns in society in those days. And we see it now in the energy field as well. And I think you as leaders in academia and media and my friends from industry who are here, we know that we need to do something rather urgently to help this continent remain competitive and perhaps even a leader through knowledge and through kind of finding a purpose to become more competitive and less entitlement-oriented. Grumpy old man speaking here. And of course, energy has a role to play in this. I'm going to spare you the Shell propaganda bit, which my speechwriter put in here. But it's a good company, okay? But I think it's a combination of three things that we really have to do. We have to get the policies right in society. We have to make sure that the policies enable technology development. But then we have to work in the very, very hard part, which is behavior. So look, if I walk through this a little bit quickly, and And to take the context of climate change, which is sort of where we're looking today, Copenhagen, and what's going to happen. We probably will have some sort of political deal, and we will hope that it takes less long to formulate the regulations that it did to decide on the last round of WTO. I think that was 24 years, or the time it took Brussels to not want to mandate the shape of bananas and all that sort of other good stuff that sometimes happens here. So carbon capture and storage can only happen if we have the policies around that flowing out of Copenhagen. And why is that important? It's important to have carbon capture and storage because otherwise we're going to run out of fuel, because if we keep burning fossil fuels the way they're being burned today, the planet is in danger. So it's a bridging technology that has to happen. It raises a lot of fears and concerns. We see that in debates where I live currently and work currently in Holland, where we've just been working with the government, and the government has agreed that one old gas field will be used, called Barendrecht, will be used to capture CO2. It's developed a new phenomenon called NUMBY, not under my backyard. And it's a real concern. You know, people live with CO2 in the ground all the time. They don't know it, and therefore they don't fear it. And when you want to put it back in again, it seems to be dangerous. And of course, the critics use this argumentation and that fear to argue against CCS, and they argue against CCS because exactly they think it's going to prolong the hydrocarbon age. So again, if you want to have an informed debate about these things, the scientific knowledge, the journalistic digestion of that scientific knowledge can only be done if people are open and curious in society around us. And then we can develop the technologies that we need. Then comes the hard bit, the really hard bit. And that is, who is going to tell people, us, that we cannot use as much energy as we have been so far? Who's going to tell us to be less comfortable, less mobile, less productive, and so on and so forth? Which government is going to try and run for re-election on a platform that says, actually, you're going to live a colder and less comfortable and less interesting life? So this is where I think Atomium culture can play an enormous role as a catalyst for change in the way that society treats knowledge and in the way that society treats science. And you know, this is something that I think we could do here if we get this thing right. So anyway, you can't print money, but you can print money, but you can't print knowledge. Sorry. And as a teacher, I learned then that unless you have patience, unless you respect your audience, your children, and start with the knowledge base that they have, they're not going to learn. And they will never be able to understand the data and understand how data becomes information and how information becomes knowledge, which we're lucky turns into insight, which we're even luckier turns into wisdom and can guide us forward. So I think rather than just staring at the competitiveness and comfortable manufacturing that we get out of places like China and India, we should look at other countries and what they're doing. Japan and South Korea, for example. They're two very mature economies that face many of the same issues that Europe is grappling with today. And they're finding a way to bring innovation to the forefront. And they seem to be able to do that without having all the societal debates around whether progress is a good or a bad thing. So we perhaps should look at them as well. Because if we can learn from these others, Europe will probably be able to contribute more. And if we don't act, those of us who have an interest and a passion for this, who on earth will? Thank you.